Well, welcome to the first presenter session of the day, I guess. For this first one, we always like to kind of start out and do something for all of the kind of new people that are new to Jamf software and new to the Casper Suite. So, you know, one of the core things with the Casper Suite are policies, and it's something that once you get it, you can do anything you want, and the world kind of opens up. But if you don't quite understand it, it can be a little complicated. Called up Justin and said, hey, would you be interested in doing an intro to policies or policies 101 session? He said, absolutely. I thank him very much for being here. So from Stony River, Justin Rummel.
Thank you. Good morning. Apparently I'm a morning person. It's just trying to get past the 10 p.m. mark. That's going to be fun for the rest of the week. Of which, welcome to Jamf Nation 2014. Since this is the first actual presentation after the keynote, I'll do a little bit of maintenance in that please mute your devices. Not really for me. I don't care. I can talk over it. I probably won't be able to even hear it from here, but if I do, I might answer it. But it's more for your neighbors. So please check, mute. We greatly appreciate it. I do have about 50 slides to cover and about 30 minutes to give you 15 minutes of Q&A session. So some of this will be really quick. Some of it I'll actually go into detail, but hopefully we'll have plenty of time so I can take your questions, and Cam will return on stage and we can both field those questions. With that, I'm Justin with Stony River. That was Cam with Jamf Software. Next. We're doing Policies 101, Unleash the Power, because really that is where all the power is right now for Mac management, is being able to do a policy. There really is no step 2. We're all talking about policies. I'm not going to go Fight Club with this, but well, we might have some examples at the end. When I'm doing jump starts, I usually try to break policies down into the simplicity of what do I want to do and to whom. The what part is very simple as long as you have the actual objects ready and available for you to use, those objects being packages, DMG files, directory configurations like AD, doc items, printers, etc. Once you have those ready at your will, then we can actually perform some actions. But it's also a little bit of, I have one question with 27 parts to actually make this complete. We do have general packages, as we see on the left-hand side of the main screen of the JSS, and we actually have a picture of the JSS right now. Whenever I talk to people, I will reference the blue section on the left-hand side versus the white section in the main body on the left-hand side. But we're basically going down in the white section, down from top to bottom, and we're going to talk about each item. Some will be very brief, some will be detailed-oriented. Well, you get to take a little mental picture or reference your own JSS if you have one in front of you. So general. First 3 items are I skipped it. General. First 3 items are display name, enabled, and categories. The display name I always reference it as the pretty name. You can use punctuation, you can use spaces, capital letters, anything that you want to make it easier for you. Also, what your end users may see in self-service. Enable is pretty, just checkbox, yes, no, it's enabled. If an item has become obsolete, go ahead and uncheck it. Maybe it's doing evil things, like the say command, and everyone's machine is talking, we can uncheck that. Categories are pretty specific or special in that we need to make sure that we have something available that could be potential to the end user in some cases for self-service. Default categories I will usually create are applications, OS, scripts, printers, maybe plugins, if you want to separate that out. But make sure that you have something that's relevant to your end users because they could be visible in self-service. Then we have triggers. when should I do something? And on the first 3 triggers, if you think installing applications on these first 3 triggers, I would ask you, what kind of administrator do you want to be? These are the times that individuals are the most impatient. When you start a computer, how long have we been referencing? The start time for me to get into my login screen is this many minutes or this many seconds. And if you're trying to install applications at that time, your user is going to be very frustrated. I would not advise the course of action for, I believe it was, it may have been New Orleans Airport, that people were getting into baggage claim so fast, and then they were upset that their baggage just wasn't there. They had to wait 5 minutes. And so their solution was, well, let's make them have a long path to get to baggage, and that way they'll get there on time. Things that I would use this for. Let's take a look at firewall settings for a particular jumpstart. That was a requirement that not just as a steady state, but every time this thing starts up, make sure the firewall is turned on. All right. Network settings, command lines, just a simple script, triggers it off. Firewall is always on when it starts. Maybe some network environment items for logins. Check to make sure that you're on your network versus a home network. I would post out a little script that says, do a DNS lookup on something inside my network that would only be available if you're on the LAN. And if you're on the LAN, then go ahead and do something. Maybe mount a share distribution point, whatever. But it does some validation before it tries to attempt, because if you're doing automatic mounts for your home directories, if you're offsite, are you going to make them wait the 30-second delay time before they can work at home, or can we just kill the process and move forward? Haven't had much options for logout, so we'll leave that to someone's discretion. When I was saying I make a little script, I made a little script. This is available on our GitHub repo. It's a file share _mount. I have a link to it at the end, and I'll be sure to share these slides so you don't need to worry about it right now, but it will be available. There's a couple other triggers. Network state change, in case if someone plugs in Ethernet, and they may also be attached to wireless. What do you want to have priority? So if someone comes in, plugs in Ethernet, why don't you go ahead and check to see if you're connected to a Wi-Fi? If so, turn Wi-Fi off. It tunnels all the traffic over Ethernet. Example for a network state change. Enrollment complete. I've been becoming a big fan of enrollment complete in that you can have a first run script. So if you take an item out of the box, double click the PKG for to automatically enroll, do the first run or the enrollment complete, and have a first run script, or maybe a enterprise application that's required. For one jumpstart, they had a Citrix environment. They would literally, their methodology for re-imaging machine was use recovery HD and then hand it back to them. The end user would then go ahead and walk through the setup assistant so they can be an administrator. That was their policy. They were administrators. And then go to /enroll to enroll themselves into the JSS, and instantly would install the Citrix application so that way they have all their enterprise applications at their fingertips immediately. And that was their imaging workflow, basically recovery HD. Recurring check-ins are what's going to be used 4 out of 5 times. Just go ahead and schedule on every 15 minutes or maybe 30 minutes if you have a large environment, just to go ahead and check those performances. And then custom. So customs was initially, I think, described to me back in JSS version 6 days was a way to test. But I don't like to use it for testing. I like using scope for testing. Here are my test little guinea pigs. I'm going to focus on them so that way it doesn't roam wild, or I don't have to remember my custom name. However, an idea would be is to use them for cascading policies. So at the end of one script, you say, okay, you're done. Go ahead and trigger another policy to do additional items because you just have priorities or prerequisites coming one before the other. Execution frequency. You may have seen these before. The once per items for computer and user means once. When it fails, it will fail and stop. It won't ever try again. It's not try every minute until it actually works. Is just do it once, because who wants to have 525,600 failures inside their policies? Let's just do it once. The once per week, day, month. Once per day is going to be sanity checks, security items, but the week and month, I usually give examples for software updates. Whether it's you're forcing software updates and just trigger it and make it go forward, or maybe something that's available in self-service because your users are standard users, and have them feel like they have the power to go ahead and trigger those software updates themselves. And then for ongoing. So you gotta be careful for ongoing, because that's just going ahead and trigger on the every 15. But when you actually select ongoing, there is that little checkbox right below that becomes available. It says, make available offline. It will save whatever you're trying to do onto a local machine, so it's always available. It's not dependent on talking to the JSS. There are server-side limitations, client-side limitations. Server-side is beginning and an end date. Great for beta testing. If Yosemite wasn't released last week, I would have mentioned this would be a great idea for beta testing for Yosemite. Client sides, particular days or time frames. Again, software updates, easiest example. Maybe you don't want software updates to run during the work day, but let them go off at night or maybe on the weekends. Great. So we can set up the client-side restrictions so that way they're available during the nights and weekends. And then finally, the network connection, you can force that. We're only gonna get this if you're on Ethernet, because it's something huge. Final Cut Pro, the Creative Cloud, things like that. All right, that was general. We're on to packages. We have a couple of options. Install, which is probably the easiest item, but caching and install from cache. These are also a couple policies in case if you have, again, large packages. So iMovie, Final Cut, Adobe, this is really for your end user experience. We can cache an installer onto the user's machine, and then once it's cached, we can set up a second policy to say, install that cached item from self-service. That way, when they're getting ready to install the Adobe Creative Suite, they don't have to wait for the 6 gig download to happen. It's already been done and sitting and waiting on the machine. The install happens instantly, and it's all about for the end user experience. And then we can also have select your distribution points, whether you're at, for enterprises, it may be for building A versus building B, or maybe if for remote users, you want them to use cloud storage. Software updates. We can install them, have a policy trigger once a month, once a week, maybe make them available in self-service, as I mentioned before. I love scripts. So the thing about scripts is you need to make sure you need to reference a K-base article, and I'll have a link at the end of the slides. The fact that the first 3 variables of a script are already been taken by Jamf. So if you run a script on your command line, so /script name.sh, and then you put a space and then something, a space, then something, and space, then something else. Those are variables that you're sending into the script. The first 3 variables are already taken, mount point, computer name, and username, kind of. The username is actually required that it will work only on login, or when in self-service if the user is logged in as self-service. So wrote quick 5 lines really quick. So I want to send a message to the front of the screen to show me what are my environment variables of a user running for self-service. And we'll see if we can get this quick video. So test machine, logged in as a test user, but that 3rd variable is missing, even though we're running as a self-service item. So we'll go ahead and log in as secret Apple password that I set for all my test users. We'll try to run the script again, but the 3rd time, since the user is logged into self-service, that 3rd variable is available. So the $3, make sure that it's either login or for self-service when the user is logged in. For docs and printers, capture them with Casper Admin. It's the easiest thing in the world. I had an individual who had never used Casper Admin before, but he was still managing with the JSS. And this was just a mind-blowing experience on how easy it was versus trying to figure out the full file, colon, 3 slashes to the full path of his doc items. So we can add printers, add docs, left or right-hand side, remove them. That's one of the items if you want to remove FaceTime from the doc. Because you don't want anybody to actually use it, but we don't want to delete it because who knows what happens on the next update from Apple. So we can just remove it from the doc, and that way it's just not sitting in front of the user. Local accounts. Obvious items of creating a local account, that's great. There's a checkbox for having them as administrator. There's also another one for File Vault. So that way they are included into the File Vault pass. We can reset the accounts, we can delete accounts. We can also disable for File Vaults. So for an example, let's say you have a school lab environment. Standardized testing is happening for next month. We want to set up a couple of policies for user accounts. We want a standardized testing user, password something simple so that way everyone can log in and it's a controlled environment for your standardized testing. We'll go ahead and create the accounts. We'll also set up a policy that says in 24 hours after the standardized testing is done, we're going to change the password so no one can go back into that environment. And then maybe 14 days later, we want to delete the account because we don't need it again. We want to give it 14 days just to make sure that if someone needs to retest, it's still somewhat there and available. We don't want to totally destroy anything yet. But we can set up all 3 policies on day 1 and we just wait for them to flow when they actually need to flow. Makes your job easier and enjoy your weekends. Our management account. So on Jumpstarts, I recommend that the management account be different than the account that Help Desk, I'm using that generically, Help Desk uses to log into your machines. If there's a known password by multiple people to get into that machine, that's fine. Though you need to be an administrator to help with that machine. But the management account that the JSS uses to do its actions in the background, I recommend it to be different. That way, one, change management is easy. That way, if Help Desk individual leaves, fine, we'll just change the Help Desk name. Our management account is not in jeopardy. But with that separation, we can also actually release ourselves from really even knowing what the management account password is, because that management account password is actually stored in your MySQL database, and when it needs it, the client just calls out and says, hey, give me the username and password. It comes back down and is able to execute. One of the nice features for the management password is you can able to randomize the password so nobody knows what it is. Because again, who cares? It's just stored into the database and it's come back down. We could also enable and disable File Vault for management account as well. Restart options. So we have the startup disk and go to current disk. You can go to netboot, which is great for, again, for lab environments. Netboot all 30 machines in a lab, have them self-image, and then restart themselves, and you're done. Again, your weekends are free. Restart action, I recommend you to test, because you read the restart actions, whether a user is logged in or not logged in. It makes sense when you read it, but then you're still like, is this really going to work or not? Try every scenario. If someone's logged in or not logged in, does the application or does the install require a restart? What happens? Does it immediately restart? Or does it wait for, or to have a display button for you to proceed? Running applications may interrupt that restart. So your expected behavior for restarting automatically may be interrupted. Also, the restart methodology is doing either a sudo reboot or sudo shutdown -r now. That can't be used for File Vault. So you can't force a file vault restart in that fashion, because when the user is actually restarting, it will prompt them for, give me your password so I can tuck it into the recovery HD for file vault so we can unlock the disk. The sudo reboot or sudo shutdown -r now bypasses that, and so you'll never get file vault started. You have to do the manual restart. Maintenance, always check the update. Maybe not always, but for a script you don't need to, but always check the update. We need to know that not only that things have been done, but that we have a new system environment, so that way smart groups can be updated and we can actually have a better understanding of where that device is actually, states is in. There is an option for reset name. So we can actually force a particular name of a device coming from the JSS. Pretty nice. Only recently until iOS 8 did you have that option for forcing a name on a iOS device. We can install all the cached items. If you have a bunch of policies just caching, and just go ahead and blanket install. And there's also what I call Mac Voodoo. Fix permissions, fix by host files, flush the system cache, things that people will often recommend. Have you tried this? And you're like, I don't know. Okay, I'll go ahead and try it just to see if it works. And then sometimes it actually does work. Sometimes it doesn't make any improvement whatsoever. So I put that under the voodoo category. Files and processes. We can look for different files if they're sitting on a file system. So I can't remember the virus that people were concerned about at one time, but it was a very specific path, and if this existed, we can delete it, because we do have a delete option. So that might be a use case. If this file exists, remove it. We can also look for processes to kill if you wish to, or the run command, so you can do the say command and have fun with all the individuals that make 30 machines do say at once. But I still throw caution about killing processes and deleting items, because sometimes things can go awry, and it's a great way to do a lot of damage all at once. We can do stupid things faster. So that was the what. Let's talk about to whom. We have two options, scope and self-service. For scope, you got computers, computer groups, buildings and departments. The buildings and departments were hopefully set up at the beginning. We have, if you go to the settings or the gear icon on the top right-hand corner, then you go to network organizations, and then you can have create buildings and departments. However, you also need to make sure that those buildings and departments are then applied to the devices. So if your enrollment process doesn't include making sure that the department and building is actually updated, if you scope to those items, or later on if exclude or limit to those items, it won't be accurate. Groups are great because you have smart and static groups. Static, predefined lists. Smart, it takes a look at your environment for seeing what they want to do. Scope targets. Or you can bring a sledgehammer and just say everybody. Like flash patch, everybody gets it. For our limitations, the example that I have for doing a network environment, see if you're on the network or off the network by doing a DNS lookup. Well, you can also set a limitation that says, well, do this thing, but have the limitation of being on your network, defined by a network segment. However, you got to make sure that your environment is unique. 192.168.0.whatever or 1.whatever are also used at home. And so if you try to mount or install in that same network environment, it will still work at home because it's not that intelligent. It's looking at IP address ranges. Make sure that your environment is unique. For exclusions, popular ones I've did is IT department. For some reason, IT departments don't want to be included into the management system. I don't know why. But that way you can have a static group of exclusions. Everybody but not me. Also VIPs, people who can jeopardize my career. Maybe you want to go ahead and install all the items, but not those people, because if something really goes wrong, they're okay. And once I haven't heard anything, okay, I'll remove that exclusion and they can get it a little bit later. Self-service. Self-service is how you make users, in the Mac world, standard users, not admins, feel like they have power. It removes the concern about being managed and losing the control. When Macs were originally introduced into an enterprise environment, IT didn't know what to do with them. They're hands off. So you're administrators. You can do whatever you want to that machine. But now we're asking to actually control. Some people have a hard time of letting go of that control. But this is how we can actually show that you might have a little bit still of control by using self-service. If you haven't, I would also, for the last item for icons, has everyone, if you haven't had a jump start, please talk to me. I will tell you about this trick. But it's, if you copy an application or a file, icon, and you want that particular icon, to make it available in self-service, it does a lot. So for the software update icon, the little globe and the arrows going around, that's pretty obvious that we're doing self-service. It'd be nice to have that icon available in self-service so people can visually see, oh, this is what I'm getting ready to do. If you copy this software update application in System Library Core Services, we can then go to preview and there's an option that says new from clipboard. It will copy the icon in giant resolution and you can save that off as a PNG file. If you haven't seen that, talk to me. I will go into further detail. I'll either your laptop or my laptop and I'll demonstrate that. User interaction. So great item because sometimes we want to do software updates or application patch management, but the user is using the application at that time. And of course we care. We don't want to actually interrupt their workflow. So in the case for Office, if you run Office update, we'll have all the Office applications will quit and all your browsers will quit. Great feature, all for the SharePoint plugin. But maybe someone's actually doing some Excel calculations, writing a Word document, creating a PowerPoint presentation. We can add defer items. So that way, yes, I know you need to install this, but give me an hour so I can finish up. I'll hit save and then go ahead and do it on whatever you need. We care. So speaking of Office, example workflow. We got Microsoft Office. We'll download the latest and greatest, which was a couple of weeks ago, 14.4.5, Bash patch management, and Yosemite examples. So for the 14.4.5, go ahead and download it from Microsoft Update. Who do I want to deploy it to? I want to deploy it to anybody who has Microsoft Word, but not 14.4.5. And I would do that within a smart group. That gives me my list of potential users because maybe not everybody has Word. Bonus level, defer options. And I would actually highly recommend that because you don't know if it could be in use. For the Bash patch, so we had Lion, Mountain Lion, and Mavericks. 3 different versions available as to patch Bash. They're very specific, and even more so, it has to be the .5 release of each one. So 10.7.5, 10.8.5, 10.9.5. If you weren't at that level, it would fail. It says, no, you need to update before. So I would create a smart group again, look for all the machines with 10 whatever .5, those who are the individuals that can use the patch, and deploy it. Or if you wanted to, create a policy that says, here's Yosemite. Here's Yosemite. So this is not an imaging workflow, obviously. This is providing the Yosemite update to your end users. Go ahead and download Yosemite installer from the Mac App Store. I will assume you'll get the proper licensing for your organization. And then cache it. This is a great example for using the caching feature within a policy. That way, when the user has the display that says you can upgrade to Yosemite, they click the install now, and it installs now, not try to download the 5 gig file from your distribution point. So that's what I have for policies. We're going to open it up for questions. Here's some resources for the GitHub repo that we have for Stony River. Also, the script parameters was the Jamf KBase article. And we're open for your questions. Your hands first.
You had iBeacon on one of your slides?
I did have iBeacon. You can do, it's only exclusions for iBeacon. There's also for limitations as well. So I don't have an iBeacon. I haven't been able to test iBeacon. I need to talk to Tim about that, see if I can get that fixed. But yes, you can, once you register your beacon within the JSS, and you can have a limitation or exclusion, I believe, so that way if it's close. The example that I have heard as recently as yesterday is walking into a conference room where there's an Apple TV that's connected to the projector. When you walk into the conference room and you are then close to the beacon, that beacon will install a configuration profile for AirPlay onto your device, so everybody instantly in that conference room has the ability to go into the Apple TV. Once you walk out, that profile goes away. So that was an example for the iBeacon that was provided. Other questions? Yes?
Regarding software updates, do you recommend having a software update server in the local and using that at the reference point? Or do you find it fairly easy to be able to use it on that?
For software updates, it first goes back to your environment. Everyone's going to be different. So for a recent government jumpstart that I did, they have to test and vet every single software update. So they use, it was actually Jamf's NetSUS, to validate each one. And once it was approved by their security team, then they can go and check that update to make it available to people. There's also the option for caching service. Caching service is reactive, so someone has to download it first, but then after that download has happened, then everyone gets to enjoy the benefits and it can feed the rest of the environment. The caching service also has iOS. Caching service can do the Mac App Store. So caching service has its benefits in those regards if you're dealing with iOS devices and Mac App Store distribution, but it's reactive. Someone has to do it first. You can't seed it, and you can't say yes or no. So it depends on your environment.
Just a follow-up question.
Sure.
Is anybody here using like a software update server? And I'm just wondering what kind of man-hours you use on your own server, because you're going to have to cache it, I assume that server decides, okay, this one's going on, this one's not. Just sort of a little idea what kind of man-hours on a daily basis.
It can be very minimal. It depends, again, on your environment. If you say, okay, I trust everything that Apple sends me, I want to download it instantly as soon as I can and make it available to everybody, there are 2 checkboxes that allow you to do that. You can go ahead and download anything that Apple has and instantly make it available. So the man hours are really, it's dependent on what your environment needs. If someone has more specific for their environment, to give an example, yeah.
I'm using caching servers in each of my 16 buildings, and I probably spend maybe an hour, 2 hours a week managing caching.
And that is for file size, or how are you managing caching server?
Just specific downloads.
Okay. So you would go to each location and say, I know people are going to want this. I'll go ahead and download it on my local machine so it is cached. Yeah.
One of the things that we discovered is we have software updates run on our startup system so that we get the latest things. And what we discovered was at 50 sites, about 20,000 devices, people hadn't kept up with their firmware updates. So we ran into the firmware nightmare where our machines were constantly rebooting into firmware. So what we did was we made a slight modification, did an extension attribute to identify the firmware's target us a couple of months to slowly reintroduce those firmware updates. In fact, we have about 8,000 or 9,000 laptops that never are plugged into Mavericks.
So firmware updates, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't talk about it during for the software update slides. Firmware updates will try to run and execute right now, and if you had any other update available, they're lost. It just basically deletes them. So yes, you're gonna have to always watch out for firmware updates. I haven't seen much, but it's still, I think there are some new ones that are coming out with Yosemite, but they're kind of, if you've seen a double restart when upgrading Yosemite, you got a firmware update.
Well, and the problem we had was when we transitioned from a totally unmanaged architecture into a managed architecture, it was the nightmare where people were, you tell them, you have to do all this, you have to do all this, and until you have a campus that says, why are my computers rebooting 8 times in a row, have you applied your firmware updates? What are those?
Yes. Any other questions? Come on, I like questions. It puts me on the spot. What?
Another one that kind of caught us was whenever we have a Flash update or a Java update, which is the bane of our existence, we do recurring check-in. However, we started out initially applying an update inventory, and we found with 20,000 devices that literally our JSS was getting beat to death with inventory updates. When you have a check-in every hour and you have all these devices, because in the school district, everybody powers on at 8 o'clock in the morning. So you have 20,000 devices reporting in, 20,000 devices trying to do. So we found after a period of time, as we started trickling that back, we would do an initial inventory update for about a week to 10 days. We monitor our inventory check-ins, and then once we get past that first week to 10 days, where we get about 85%, we switch over our recurring check-in policy to also include our inventory update. Otherwise, it crippled us where we couldn't do anything on the JSS that first day while everybody was updating.
That makes sense. For that large of devices that are checking in and then having to report that they got the Flash update and being in a school environment where everyone clicks on at 8 o'clock, that would be a good example of why not to do update immediately. I'll put that in my little bag for jump starts for the future of why not to. Thanks. Other questions? Yes. Custom triggers is yep.
Is there a limitation on how many loop off of each other?
The question was, is there a limitation for custom triggers? I don't think so. Especially you can have them cascading that. So for my scripts example, you have script 1, and at the bottom line of script 1 is trigger policy 2. That goes off. At the bottom policy 2 is 3. It goes off, and it keeps on going down, cascading down. I don't know of a limitation.
Yeah, there's not a limitation necessarily, but you got to be a little careful if you're doing that, because they're not technically, I mean, they seem like they're cascading, but they're actually nested. So the first policy won't technically finish until all the other ones that you've trickled have finished as well, if that makes sense. So policy 1 won't finish till the very, very end.
So it's like a subshell.
Yeah,
you got to wait to clear
exactly.
all your subshells so that we can go back up and finish.
Yep. Yeah.
I've got another question. I've got multiple administrators at multiple sites, just simply because of school district. You got to make them feel like they have some kind of level of power. And I'm trying to come up with a best practice where I'm seeing people that are saying, well, I want to install 25 applications. So I'm going to write a policy that installs 25 applications.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get them past that. I'm trying to tell them less is more, make them all separate, base them off inventory, and that way if somehow something gets screwed up, you've got a teacher that decided to accidentally throw away her office, it's going to trigger and reinstall just Office, not reinstall 85,000 other applications.
The way that I explain, so because I guess we should be repeating the question for video, other administrators that you assist decide to create a policy that says install 50 applications all at once. And I highly recommend against that because their update cycles are all different, and having to do one after another is just a nightmare of keeping it in your head. Because yes, you can go and review it, but you would have to review it every single time. Do one policy for one application. Once there's a new update, so in case for Office, we have 14.4.4, and then now 14.4.5 is available. You can clone it That way, all the logs for which computers have done it, you just change the file names and update your package and you're ready to go. And then if you wish, you can delete the old one. And it keeps your policies list well maintained. So definitely one application per install. The only time, so there's always exceptions for that, is if there's dependencies. And now I don't have a good example for it, but or if you have print drivers. I mean, that gets updated maybe once a year. So if you have Kanaka and HP, maybe do those, but there's special cases for it. I wouldn't recommend bundling them together. Keep one application for one policy. Yeah. Or are you stretching? All right.
I've actually got two, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so related to what you were just saying about not creating a policy that is installed a whole bunch of stuff at once, I created 10 policies for self-service for installing the three major suspects: InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, CC 2014, CC, CS6, plus Acrobat Professional 11, all out of the Creative Cloud.
Yep.
And those are working great during initial imaging, and they work great for self-service. The problem I'm running into, and this probably isn't a policy issue, it's just an Adobe issue. The InDesign CC 2014 gets installed via policy, cannot be updated. It has to be uninstalled and reinstalled directly from the Creative Cloud app. The update will fail, and then the application will then fail and fail.
So for the question is, your InDesign policy updates seem to be failing, and your solution right now is uninstall and reinstall the one application.
The updates are not being applied by the policy. These are the automatic updates that come directly from Adobe.
Oh.
The initial installation is coming from a policy.
I don't have an answer for that, do you?
How are you packaging up?
Using the Creative Cloud package.
Unfortunately, I don't have any individuals with the Creative Cloud. I mean, I assist during jump starts, but I don't manage my customers with Creative Cloud, so I don't have that experience.
Josh?
And I'm sorry, sure. I had a quick question about it. Is the same policy that you're actually rolling out for self-service, is that the same policy that's actually rolling out? Or do you do one policy for InDesign that's available in self-service and automatically distributed to your users? From within imaging, yeah. Sure, so you got the one, right? Right. Check the order that they install versus self-service versus the order that they install in coming down for the automatic policy. Okay.
So the recommendation is there may be some dependencies for InDesign, and we need to check the order of when the original applications were installed, which is a good point that for policies like anything else for imaging, if you have your priorities all matched, it will then go alphabetical. So if some of those items have dependencies that they need to exist prior to InDesign being installed, and then we may see update issues.
And what's
Okay.
interesting about this is it worked prior to the most recent update. It's some major thing that Adobe did with Creative Cloud 2014, the October 2014 update for everything, and that's what's failed.
I would highly recommend to check the Jamf Nation forums, see if anyone else is complaining about the same item. But that sounds like we have a good start.
It's just a matter of I haven't had time to go back and rebuild, using the pack.
Okay.
So my second one, if I can,
Yep.
printers.
Yes.
I have my company across 3 buildings. We've got 7 large walk-up printers, 4 of which are Macam and Ulta, and those all work beautifully through self-service and through thin imaging. The other 3 are Ricoh. Now the Ricoh's installed great during thin imaging, but if I try to install them during for self-service, I've got one that fails completely. Just don't even get the queue. And all the other ones, the queue gets created, but it doesn't install the driver.
I would have them as separate policies first. Install the drivers completely separate. Just blanket everybody with print drivers. And then have another one specifically for the configuration in self-service to configure that. But for why one works on imaging and one doesn't work in self-service is, and it may be, again, going into dependencies. If you're trying to install the drivers and then the print, maybe there's something else that's going on in the background that it hasn't been able to complete. That's all I can think of quickly.
In regards to those printers thing, I was kind of having the same problem when I worked in the school district. One of the things we did find out is we basically made two separate policies, one for print drivers and then one for the printers. And then when you get the self-service installed with printers, you said ensure that your drivers are installed first. If they're not, do not run this policy. And then that way the end user would say, okay, let me install my drivers first. We could make it a two-part thing, but we could have made it one where we just said, okay, put the policy up, install print driver, printers.
We're at 11:15.
Yeah, really good, just best practice in general. If you're ever having problems when you have something that has multiple parts, split it into different parts and test each one and see where the problems are coming up. Yeah.
I had a similar issue with some absent printers in our district, and I don't know the voodoo behind it, but once I had the Bonjour gateway for the benefit of our Apple TVs, they connected up just fine after the drivers were installed and the policy went out.
That makes sense. If you initially had configured them by Bonjour, but then the protocol was being blocked at either an access point or a switch, whatever, then that protocol wasn't getting hit to them. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yep.
So we're basically moving away from SMB printing. We just went to straight SMB printing. And to change the default options to just policy from default to just use turbos. For some reason, the composer won't grab that change, that specific. I can change trays, stapling, everything else. All that comes along, except for if I want to go from default to turbos, it does not grab that one.
I don't know about for Kerberos printing if the flag for Kerberos is going to be embedded into that one file that we're picking up with printing, or if it's going to be nested into a key tab or anything else.
If I had to guess, I would say take a look in Composer at the exclusions list. It's most likely something in the exclusions list is capturing the setting that you're looking for. So if I'm testing, a lot of times what I'll do, I would never push this out in a production environment, but just trying to figure it out. I'll go through and maybe remove all of the exclusions or the ones that I think are relevant, build a test package, push that out and see if I can find the exact file that's being modified. There's most likely something's being excluded from the package.
Yes?
What's the best way to debug the policies? And the Jamf console doesn't often give really meaningful data.
So for debugging policies, I initially go to the error log of that particular one that failed. There's been a recent change that it does not look anymore for error, failed, or anything like that. It's looking for exit code statuses. So go there first to see if it gives you any clues. Second, I will be going into the actual devices system log and installer log to see if there's any messages in there that gives me a better idea. Lastly, and most of this is for database calls, is if you go to the logging.html in the JSS, and you can actually see the logs, or pipe out from the Jamf software database.log file, I believe. Start looking at those calls as well, which reminds me I need to submit a bug because I found a database issue. Those are where I'd start for debugging.
That's really helpful because we, as a test during our Kickstarter, we were doing 5-minute inventory check. We had one
Okay, yeah, jumpstart every 5 minutes to get things going.
just to make sure that it was actually working. And we
So that sounds like it was a communication breakdown from the client to the JSS to be able to report correctly. So I would look into the installer log and the system log to see what it thinks if they both successfully done. All right, so you know it's not the install issue, it's now a communication issue from the client, Jamf binary client back to the JSS.
Just to, I've heard a lot of people talk about check-ins and inventory updates and things like that. And it's just really important to note that those are two very different things. Your check-in is going to happen by default every 15 minutes ongoing. Your inventory check-in, might be a once a day or a once a week, depending on.
Yeah, default now is once a week.
Yeah.
It used to be once a day.
Yeah, so depending on how you get started and what you do during your jump start. A check-in doesn't include that whole inventory report about what apps are installed and hard drive size and things like that. A check-in is just a timestamp and an IP address basically. And the big difference that comes up there, or where it really starts to matter, is a check-in is just I want to say a few hundred bytes of data. An inventory update can average 300, 400, 500 kilobytes of data. So if you start, yeah, you know where I'm going with this, right? If you start thinking about that, you multiply that over how many devices you have in your environment. When you're doing inventory updates very, very frequently, it's a good way to kind of flood your network. So schedule your inventory updates for once a day, once a week, or whatever you need. But you can let your check-ins run every 15 minutes because there's very little data moving back and forth there.
Why would the check-ins stop?
They really shouldn't. The check-ins are a launch daemon that's created on the client machines, and it's just sending basically an HTTPS request out to the JSS every 15 minutes.
If you really have one that's stopped, I would do the Jamf binary remove framework, clear out the username, the management account, clear off from the admin group membership, and then re-enroll, and it should fix itself.
We've noticed ours just stop for no reason, either after an update or with the stop checking in months at a time.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is can you guarantee that those machines are powered on and available to connect back to the JSS? Yeah?
Any other questions?
Does the check-in check for policy?
Yeah, the check-in, we call it a check-in a lot, but it's technically a policy check-in. So a check-in is executed at any of the triggers that Justin showed up there, right? So you get a recurring check-in every 15 minutes. You get a login check-in if you have that enabled, a startup check-in if that's enabled, a logout check-in if that's enabled, and a couple others as well. So all the things you see listed there.
Of which reminds me, make sure that you enable those in the gear icon settings. Startup, login, and logout have to be enabled for if you want those triggers to be available to you. They're off by default.
Yeah, the recurring is the only one that's on by default, I guess. Those.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Yeah.
With frequency, we're talking about once per computer or once per user. If the policy is changed, for example, printers, we were talking about printers earlier. I had an example where I pushed a printer through, but then I realized that it packaged the driver as well. I added the driver after the fact. However, I was unsure if that policy, now that I've changed it, would run again on machines that have been already run. Is that absolute setting once per computer, or does it work when you change the policy?
So I'll repeat the question again. Policy was configured to set the printer configuration. Realize print drivers are not available. We'll pretend like it was a day later. Print drivers are not available, so we add those to that same policy. What happened, or is it restart all the log settings, or all the ones that within the past day that actually were able to successfully run that policy, they'll never get the drivers, is the question. They'll never get the drivers. You would have to flush the history of all the ones that succeeded to get, so that way they can do the drivers. So again, 2 policies for drivers or one for drivers and one for the printer configuration. But yeah, once it's set and they've gone, if you change them, the ones who have succeeded, they believe they're still succeeded. They're not going to look at any difference. Yes?
For email notifications when policies fail, can you get a summary for, like, if you're pushing out to 4,000 volunteers, are you going to get one on each?
You'll get an email notification for every machine that errs.
Will they ever give you the option to get a summary so you can, like, in the morning, you know, you need to flush out and
That's a good feature request. So for feature requests like that, again, JF Nation's great. And that way people can upvote, downvote for the concept or idea. But that's not possible right now.
You put that in there, I'll vote for it.
There's two.
Yes?
Is there any way to make, or to get the, to make the policies kind of installed in order, or to take effect in order? Is there any way to like prioritize one policy over another?
I believe it's going to install by alphabetical. If you're trying to say a thin imaging application, and as soon as it enrolls, do these 10 applications install all at once. I believe it's going to be doing it alphabetically, or I don't believe
it's alphabetical by policy name. By policy
There's
names.
no priority on policies.
There's no priority on policies. But I mean, I've seen people do, just start numbering them and
So-
whatnot to get that.
You could do the cascading idea that we mentioned before. Also, what was described yesterday was smart group items. So if a machine, so you're looking at we'll just pretend Adobe Flash, because it's first. And then a smart group status says Adobe Flash installed is yes. And you're looking for that smart group status for Java. So you can then force by smart groups to go down. It's an idea versus what else could be possible. Anything else? I'm getting blinded by the light, so it feels like.
It's time for lunch.
Yes?
Oh, got one.
Is there a way to say you update a package policy? Is there a way to report it automatically? So it has to go into flush the law. Is there a way to help us do automatic updates of the package?
So the question is, if you update a policy from one version of an application to a second version application, is there a way to automatically to flush the history so that way all the applications can get, or all the devices can get the install? It's not going to happen by default, which is why I would recommend cloning, so that way you have a clean slate for everyone to go run. And then once you're happy, then you can remove the old one. I think that's it. That way we can go for lunchtime. Thank you very much.